trade worries rocking the stock market. Here now is Ian Bremmer, CEO of the Eurasia Group and author of the new book, Us versus Them, The Failure of Globalism. And Ian, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Sure, glad to be here.
Are investors right to be worried about tariffs?
No. I mean, in the sense that the United States and China are very interdependent, and Trump understands that. So do the Chinese. We have the Secretary of Treasury heading over to Beijing. They will talk. I do believe that there will be a round of tariffs. It won't all be just fine. There'll be some cost, but that's about it. I'd be very surprised to see this escalate in a big way. I think that Trump's headline announcements are always much worse than the ultimate bite on so many things, whether it is NAFTA or it's China or it's aluminum and steel. On technology, I think we have a problem where the Americans and the Chinese are not interdependent. It is zero-sum battle. So for example, I think the Broadcom-Qualcomm decision not to let that go through, much bigger deal for the American economy long term than anything we've said about tariffs, and that is going to be a fight, even a Cold War between the Americans and the Chinese.
Who will win the tech war between the U.S. and China?
I don't know. I don't know. You know, the Chinese have better data and more data. We have better scientists and more scientists. It is not clear that we will keep all of those scientists for an us versus them reason, right? I mean, Trump will probably never build the wall. But Trump is doing a very good job at telling some of the most mobile people in the world, internationals, that actually you're not so welcome in the United States. And some of those will eventually choose not. I mean, one of the things that bothered me, one of the statistics in the last year that I really didn't like about the United States was that 11% of international students applying to college, we had a decrease after Trump came in, right? And it's much worse for graduate students for STEM applications, right? And if we want the best and brightest, we don't necessarily want to say, America first, we're building walls.
When it comes to technology, though, I think investors are worried that Apple might be targeted in China as potential retaliation. We know Apple is such a big part of the stock market. How do you price a risk like that?
Right now, the Chinese are doing a very good job at targeting in a very small way those companies that are linked to Trump, red states, right? I mean, that's sorghum, that's soybeans, that's what they want to hit. If this were to grow, then you hit bigger multinationals that would have an impact on the U.S. economy as a whole. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about the Chinese hitting Apple. I'm worried about the Chinese having an AI and technology environment where no American firms that do big technology are particularly welcome, and vice versa for the United States and China. That would be my concern.
But still, Facebook's not in China.
That's right. Google's not in China.
Google either. So
Amazon's not in China.
Apple's kind of just hanging out there.
Not just that. I mean, even Microsoft. There are a lot of American technology companies doing business in China right now. I'm suggesting that in 5-10 years' time, that's going to get harder.
Harder in what sense?
Harder in the sense that the Americans and the Chinese have completely different models, and the Chinese are developing their own standards, right? And so these are not going to play together. The reason why I'm not worried about a trade war is because they export, we import, we need their stuff, they need to send it and sell it to us. That is not a problem. That relationship works. If they want, now if we have a trade war, we will both lose, right? They will lose more because their economy is smaller, but it is stupid, and we're not going to do it. Right? Because we're not that stupid. There are a lot of people that are trying to keep the trains on the rails. On technology, that's just not true.
Because when President Trump says, hey, we have a $500 billion trade deficit with China, he seems to just want to level that out a bit, yet investors are saying trade war, trade war, trade war.
No, he just wants a win, right? Hey, Trump wants a win on South Korea. I mean, you didn't change, you didn't level it out. You got a slightly better deal from the United States by the Americans muscling the South Koreans. We're a lot bigger than they are. They need our security. China, it's harder to do, so as a consequence, it's not going to be as clear of a win. But nonetheless, I think that the concerns about trade war are overstated. Concerns about global populism and the unwinding of the liberal democratic model, what I write about in my book, Us versus Them, those are not overstated. Those are understated. People seem to think that if we get rid of Trump, that things are going to go back to normal. That suddenly it'll be we'll have the government as usual. That now that Brexit's been such a disaster, the Europeans understand that they can't unwind Europe. That's all just wrong. We are now facing the most divided societies that you and I have ever lived in, at a time when the economies are doing particularly well. So, I mean, clearly, when interest rates go up and when the economies aren't so good, then what's going to happen? Like, do you think it's going to get less divided? No, these people are going to be really pissed off. Right?
Although, do you think the division is more also because people have access to social media, they can now broadcast their feelings in a way that they couldn't 20 years ago?
I think that there are four, so yes, you're right. I think that I wish it was only about one thing. I wish it was just about the economics, because it'd be so easy to fix if it was just about the economics. It's actually about four different things, right? One, you have a lot of people through globalization that lost jobs, right? And even though globalization is good for the economy, if you don't invest into infrastructure for them, you don't invest into training for them, you don't invest into healthcare for them, then they get really upset. They don't want to support free trade. That's obvious, right? That's why Trump pulled out of TPP. That's why Bernie Sanders opposed. That's why Hillary Clinton opposed TPP, even though she was the architect, right? Second, open borders, right? We've been saying we want open borders for a long time, but if you don't feel like your family's being taken care of, you don't necessarily want a lot of people that look different to come in and you think that they're going to change the nature, the fabric of your community and your society. That's why Merkel did so badly in Germany when she said, we'll take 1 million refugees. That's why Obama and Trump have said no mas to all of that stuff. That's the wall. That's the Mexico wall, right? That's the Muslim ban. That's the second problem. Third problem, security. We've had Republicans and Democrats in the establishment saying, let's just fight wars. Let's send troops. Let's have them in Afghanistan. We fought a war in Afghanistan longer than any war in American history. You think rich people fight in those wars? No, my dad fought, right? He was an enlisted man, right? I mean, it's the working class. And they're really angry that we're sending them off to war and they're coming back broken and they're not heroes and the Veterans Administration doesn't work.
Yeah, globalism worked for you, as you write in the book.
Yeah, worked for me doesn't work for them. And then fourth, you just raised it, technology. It's social media. Everyone has access to information, but we only follow people we like, and so it really divides society. It doesn't help civic nationalism, plus you're losing a lot of jobs through automation and AI. So it is massively overdetermined that our societies, the US and Europe, are going to become much more divided in the coming years. And Trump did not cause this problem. The reason that Trump got elected is because of this problem. That's why Sanders did so well. That's why Brexit happened. That's why Macron, sort of almost lost in the first round. That's why the Italian elections, the Hungarian elections, this is not getting fixed. This is growing. This is clearly growing.
And after Marine Le Pen's loss in France,
Yeah.
people said, okay, well, that populism experiment, it's gone, yet the rhetoric, the opinions about her still remain. You can't just eliminate those feelings just because the candidate lost.
I'm so glad you say that because, if Hillary had won in the United States, you'd have a lot of people say, dodge that bullet, nothing to worry about. Just like after the Occupy Wall Street movement. Remember? 2008, financial
right around
crisis,
the block from here.
Right around the block, lasted 6 months. We were all worried about it, and then after it's like, who cares? We must have fixed it. Must have gotten lucky. It's not random. Look, in France, Macron ran on the basis of, I want a stronger Europe. That is dead. No one supports it. The Italians, the Germans, no one's going to run with stronger Europe. He ran on the basis of more open borders and immigration, had to kill it. It was enormously unpopular. Says, I want to reform economically the country, make it more business friendly. He has done some of that. His approval ratings have gone into the toilet, right? And that's in France. And that was, keep in mind, those French elections, you had the communists and the National Front performing better in French elections than at any point in recent history. In Italy, elections that happened afterwards, they threw out Berlusconi's party. And the Northern League won. The Northern League, who basically, the Northern League, the Italian North, as you know, is pretty wealthy. It's not like the South. They said, they had one thing they wanted. They said, we're going to kick out 600,000 migrants from Libya. We're going to deport them. People love that message. Right? And the Five-Star Movement in the poorer South won on the basis of the workers are getting screwed and so we need to help these people. This is happening across the entirety of the transatlantic alliance. The only place it's not happening is Japan. Because in Japan, no immigrants and the population is shrinking. That's a scary message.
So is this the new normal? Because it almost seems like this is not something that can just sort of fizzle out after a few election cycles, right?
Correct, especially because we're not addressing it, right? I mean, I wrote the book because I worry that people don't understand that this is about to gain a lot of momentum. Trump was not an accident. Brexit wasn't an accident. This is something that is growing. And the only people that are trying to address it right now are not the big governments. It's an experiment with a city here, a mayor there, a public-private partnership, a CEO, a philanthropist. Those are all important things, and there'll be more of them, but that's not a fix. That's like the people that were trying to talk about climate change 30 years ago, right? While the governments were saying, nothing to worry about.
So do both political parties in the US, Democrats and Republicans, do they have to rethink their message to kind of survive in this new normal of division? I mean, so who's the next Trump, if you will?
Well, that's a really interesting question, right? Because in this environment, if you are an established political party, you can either move to the extremes to try to make sure that you don't lose all of this anti-establishment support, which is why Sanders and Ted Cruz and Trump did so well in the last election, or you can stay in the center, then watch your party erode while it gets destroyed by new parties that spring up. So in Germany, for the first time since World War II, we now have a nationalist party in the parliament, the Alternatives for Deutschland. They needed 5% to get in. They got 13, and now they're polling higher than the Social Democrats in Germany. That's what happened in Italy. In the UK, traditional parties are becoming more extreme. Jeremy Corbyn now leads the Labour Party, and for all that investors are concerned about Brexit, it may be that the more significant long-term impact on Britain is when Corbyn becomes prime minister.
So if I'm an investor and I'm hearing all this, right, I'm quickly forgetting about Caterpillar pointing to peak earnings on their earnings call yesterday. I'm now maybe more worried about this new political risk that's out there. And I mean, do you have any advice for investors
If you're an investor?
on how to price that going forward?
Yeah, don't price it because because investors, you're short term. This is fine. The economy in the United States is doing fine. I mean, the wonderful thing for investors is that you don't need to trade in the swamp because these people don't matter, right? I mean, we've had a war in Syria. We've had 11 million people that have been displaced, and Americans do not care. So as long as the workers don't get suitably agitated that they can really matter to the process, and the markets will say, fine, we'll just ignore it. This is not an investor problem. This is much more structural than that. This is a corporate problem because it's about the people that are investing long term. If you're a big multinational corporation, you have to ask yourself, in 10 years, what kind of consumer base am I going to have? Like Apple doesn't mind because Apple is saying, look, I'm just going to sell $1,000 smartphones, which cost more than the per capita income in some countries in the world. Because I know that us versus them is going to grow, and so I'm going to sell to us. I'm going to sell to the globalists because they're going to keep being powerful. If you're like, doing high-end private wealth banking, right, for the top 0.1%, great model, right? But for the people, for the Walmarts out there, for the people that are trying to sell to just mass consumers, this is a scary message long term because they're going to see the middle and working classes hollow out.
Yeah, again, the book is Us versus Them. Can you ID the them for us?
Sure, but it depends on where you are, right? So Trump is the most effective American president ever at us versus them. So who's the them? Mexicans coming to rape our women and criminalize our nation. Haitians bringing AIDS to the United States. That's them. Nigerians who, when they come here, will never want to return to their huts. That's them. Black athletes in the NFL who we allow to make millions of dollars and then they dare to kneel during our national anthem. That's them. Fake news, them. In other words, really important if you're Trump to support a base that feels like they've been ignored by the establishment for decades, by the business elites, the policy elites, the media elites, the university elites. Very important that Trump makes it clear that we, America first, I'm taking care of us, and they, I'm not letting them in. Muslim ban, that's them, right? And I wish it was just in the United States. It's not. This is coming soon to a theater near all of us.
You brought up fake news. So we haven't even touched on that, but obviously that brings to mind Facebook.
Yeah.
What is next for them? Obviously we saw those data security issues, but they play such a huge role in our political process. And I'm curious how you've been advising clients on the fake news issue.
Well, Facebook and fake news are two somewhat separate things, right? I mean, Facebook is a very powerful advertising company. They are responsible for what we digest as information. As an advertising company, their model is that we are not the client, a la Apple. It is we are the product, right? And so what they need to do is make sure they get as much of us as possible so they can sell us to the client, the companies that are advertising. Now, that's not going to go well, right? I mean, because what that means is that they need to ensure that we spend as much time as humanly possible on their platform, which means dividing us into narrower and narrower demographics. They need to fragment civic nationalism to make more money. And the ability of the United States government to know how to regulate that kind of thing, we don't have the technical expertise. You saw that. I mean, Zuckerberg was doing very well in Congress. He was running circles around Congress.
You saw some of the questions he was asked.
Most of them were incompetent questions by people that don't understand the business, and even if they did, they don't have the lawyers behind them to know what they could do that would be useful. I mean, ultimately, the Europeans are ahead on this. They're going to be setting most of the standards, and that because Facebook wants to have a global platform for the West, they will end up doing much in the US of what they do in Europe. But the problem is that I'm not even sure that regulating Facebook in a serious way is the best idea because, you know, Facebook is a monopoly in the United States, but as you said before, they have no access in China. So we're gonna break up our monopolies while the Chinese, soon to be the world's largest economy, are gonna promote theirs. We've got a national security problem then, my friend, right? So this is a really hard problem. But the thing that does worry me most in the near term is that everything around the way that we consume our news orients us towards breaking down civic nationalism and liberal democracy. And that is going to make us angrier. It's going to make us only follow people that we like.
Yeah, there's no middle ground. You're either on one end of the spectrum or the other, and it seems like social media exacerbates those two worlds.
I mean, I'll tell you, I'm trying, right? In the sense that I was on Laura Ingraham earlier today, and I literally went from there to Brian Lehrer, right? I mean, that's, you know, you're hitting the whole spectrum.
Wow.
But I'm telling you, there aren't many people that do that because it's so much easier to be Paul Krugman, right? And you can be a Nobel economist, absolutely brilliant. You've decided, you know what? I'm done with that. It's so much easier and it's so much more lucrative for me just to say things that all of my fan base likes all the time. Or you know, the equivalent on the right, Sean Hannity. I mean, there's a lot of ideological space between Krugman and Hannity. It's where all of the intelligence, all of the smart conversations would be between Hannity and Krugman, and yet almost all of the conversations happening in the news today are just aligned around far left or far right.
I want to get your take on a few geopolitical issues before we go.
Yeah.
President Trump's potential meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by that?
I said a year ago that I thought that Trump was much more likely to engage with North Korea and maybe even have a breakthrough than any other president. He was also more likely to blow the place up, right? So you went from very narrow tails of risks to upside and downside, nothing happening but getting worse every year, to fatter tails, upside and downside. The deal, there will be a meeting. I'm almost certain because we sent Pompeo to North Korea and didn't make any demands of the North Koreans, which means that Trump really wants to be the first American president to meet with a North Korean leader, right? Because that shows that he can do it, no one else could. That's exactly the kind of thing he wants to do. And by the way, North Koreans have already given us something. They have frozen their ICBM and nuclear tests. They need more tests to be able to feel confident they can hit the U.S. continent. That's a favorable thing for Trump. That does not mean that we will get to a deal. And the funny thing is, if we get to a deal with the North Koreans, it will be as much upside and downside as Obama's deal on Iran. In other words, it'll be better than the status quo ante, just like the Iran deal, and it will be criticized by the left and the right for giving away the store to a country that is still completely hostile to us.
You said President Trump wants to be the first American president to strike a deal with North Korea, but
To meet with the North Koreans, right, to start.
but didn't President Obama also have those goals with Iran
Yes,
to strike a deal?
yes,
So that's where
that's what I'm saying.
the problem could repeat.
Well, it depends on whether you like the deal or not. I mean, look, as a consequence of the Iran deal, oil prices went down. We helped to destroy OPEC. I mean, those are clearly good things for the average American. I mean, you want to talk about the average American who has to pay to put gas in their car? They don't care about Hezbollah. They care about the fact that OPEC's getting destroyed and America's now the oil superpower and we're going to surpass the Saudis in a few months. I don't know why Obama didn't sell the deal that way, because that's what actually matters to Americans, but instead we're talking about the evil Iranian regime. He also made it sound like it was a deal that was going to make us friends, and we're not friends. They still have ballistic missiles that are in abrogation of UN deals, and they're still supporting terrorist organizations in the region. Plus, they're opposed to our allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia. So we're not friends with the Iranians. But for the average American, the Iran deal was a win. Like, that should be obvious. And for the average American, if Trump can actually move the ball a little and, sort of help to reduce the risk of nuclear confrontation with North Korea, that'd be a win.
Because Macron is in D.C. right now for that state dinner. He
Correct.
just said he'd like to now work with a new deal on Iran. I mean,
Yes.
that's potential progress on President Trump's end.
I think that Macron actually moved the president a little. The deadline, the self-imposed deadline on us ripping up the Iran deal from Trump is May 12th. And I think that what is now likely is that Trump says, okay, I'll give it 2 more months. And in those 2 more months, you give me a new and better deal on top of this one on ballistic missiles and on terrorist support. And if you can give me that or progress on that, then I'll consider continuing with this deal. So Trump is in the driver's seat on that right now. But it's going to be hard to get it done, not least because McMaster, gone. Tillerson, gone. You've got Pompeo, you've got Bolton. They're hawkish on the Iran deal. They're putting a lot more pressure. The Europeans don't trust them. Obviously, the Russians and Chinese don't trust him. So while I think that Macron's trip was useful and fruitful on that front, I think it is still, on balance, more likely than not the Americans end up leaving the Iran deal.
All right, and then just final question.
Yeah.
Sum up all the geopolitical bubbles out there for investors. How do they kind of move along in their investing strategy with all this in the background?
We are now in the best economy that we've had in the U.S. and in the world for over 10 years, right? That's a big, and it's looking like that'll be the case for the next couple of years. That's great. The geopolitical environment is the worst of my entire lifetime. And so that means, number one, the likelihood of things really going wrong that would have a market impact, they're not 50%, but they're a lot higher than they have been. Russian cyber attacks that bring down a market, for example, an Iran war with the Israelis or the Saudis or even the US, miscalculation on North Korea, I can go on. All of those things are real near-term risks that the markets won't price in because they're tail risks, right? So as long as you're making money, you make money, but the corporations have to think about it. Long-term, we are heading to no more free market. We're heading to China will be the largest economy. They'll be authoritarian and state capitalist. So it'll be much more strategic sectors. Big American corporations are going to have to work in a world that isn't one global free market, but instead is much more fragmented, while support for liberal democracy and our institutions is more under siege. This is the long-term trajectory that we're now facing is considerably more challenging than anything you and I have experienced before.
And President Xi of China abolishing those term limits
Works for
only
him.
confirms some of the worries that you have.
Look, there's one country in the world of size that has a global economic strategy. It's not us. It's the Chinese. We started globalism. After World War II, we said, you know what, we beat these countries, but we're going to rebuild them with our values, and we're going to economic and political values, and we're going to do it because we never want a war like this again, and because we also think it's in our long-term interests to be able to build an economy that's aligned with us. Now, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, no one in the U.S. was saying, let's do that with the Soviets. Let's rebuild them and align them with our markets. They're like, long-term, who cares? We don't want to pay that kind of thing. Give them shock therapy, that'll be fine. Expand NATO. There's one country in the world right now that's thinking long-term, and that's the Chinese. They're building infrastructure all over the world to align those countries more with China, right? And while America is eating itself about whether our globalism works or doesn't work, we're eating ourselves over, does the Statue of Liberty even belong in New York Harbor anymore? I'd say probably not, right? That's a real problem.
So it sounds like you think China's a bigger threat to the U.S. than Russia.
Without any question. I mean, it's going to be the world's largest economy, and they don't support our model. I mean, Russia certainly is more willing to take risks, but China fundamentally is on a path to eating our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I think that if you ask me who I worry about the folks that are much more capable over the long term. Russia's in decline. Putin is very strong, but the Russian economy today is smaller than Canada's economy,
Huh.
right? So, I mean, I know they occupy a lot of space on the map, and they've got big military and cyber capabilities, but Putin has mismanaged this economy. You know, Ukraine, they lost Ukraine, right? I mean, so they embarrassed Obama, sure, but things have not gone well for the Russians. And if they thought manipulating our election was going to be useful for them, they've owned a much tougher set of sanctions from, you know, benevolent Trump and the Europeans than they ever would have gotten under Obama or Hillary Clinton. That's a mistake. That is Putin, who sees an opportunity tactically, but plays really bad chess.
All right, Ian, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Ian Bremmer, CEO of the Eurasia Group,
Good talking.
author of Us versus Them. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good stuff.